Hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Ramsey, and today I'm going to talk about Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and the farm worker movement, and how it has been traditionally looked at from a secular view, when in fact, like the great work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights activists coming out of the southeastern region of the United States, it was in fact a Christian movement and should be categorized as such. Now, Cesar Chavez was born in 1927, and his parents were poor after in the thick of the Great Depression. And like so many others, they migrated to California. And in that mass migration in the 30s, you're looking about 300,000 migrant workers that come in of various backgrounds, including your Filipino community, your Hispanic community, and so on. And so Cesar Chavez grew up in an environment where his family struggled. They were devoutly Catholic, and where there wasn't a lot of outs out of that lifestyle. So by 8th grade, he dropped out of school. He went to work in the fields. As soon as he was old enough, he signed up to serve in the Navy. He served for 2 years. When he came out, he went back into the fields. He married his wife, Helena Fabula, and then very quickly became an activist in order to see a unified effort to improve the lives of those who were most overlooked by society, particularly in the West. Now, the farm workers movement is a huge movement that swept through the entire United States, but was most active in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. Now, Dolores Huerta, also a child of the Depression, was born in New Mexico in the 1930s, and like Chavez's family, they ended up in California. They were in the Central Valley near Stockton, and her parents, unfortunately, faced very challenging financial circumstances and ended up getting divorced. And this is when her mother really became a woman of action and compassion and an activist. So Dolores has that modeled for her from an early age. And after having watched her friends in an incredibly diverse community, Stockton at the time had Filipino workers, Laotian, Cambodian, Hispanic workers, so on, right? So it was a very diverse community. And most of them were agricultural workers, and they sometimes only made 4 cents an hour. They were beaten and abused and sometimes even murdered by staff at the large agricultural farms, the corporate farms. In most states, they didn't have the right to organize a union, to lobby for safe conditions. As a matter of fact, one of the last efforts that Chavez and Huerta will do together is standing against the use of illegal pesticides, which caused unprecedented rates of cancer and death and disease among farm workers all the way up through the 1980s. So why? Why were these two individuals who are responsible for the farm worker movement so motivated? And it goes back to their deep Christian roots. As a matter of fact, Cesar Chavez once wrote, he said, "The place to begin for change is within our own experience, within the church. When we strike, it is for that purpose." For example, in Delano, the church has been involved with the poor in a unique way, which should stand as a symbol to other communities. When we refer to the church, we would define the word a little. We mean the whole church, the church as an economical body spread around the world. And in this way, Chavez called not only on his own Catholic roots, but on every person who proclaimed themselves a Christian to stand for dignity and respect of other human beings. In 1962, Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez joined together, and they first organized the National Farm Workers Association, which goes on to become later the United Farm Workers Association of America. And it is on that platform and in that group where they absolutely began to organize resistance to the abuse, to the poisoning, and to the unfair labor practices that they faced as migrant workers. And they called upon the local communities and the local parishes and churches to support them. Dolores Huerta said this: "When we worked at CSO, all of the religious organizations supported us. But when we started the Farm Workers Union, it was a different story. And there it was rather interesting because the first organization that supported us were the Jewish organizations, then the Protestant organizations, the last ones to come on board with the Catholics. Of course, once they did come on board, they were very, very helpful. Chavez goes on later to talk about how the Catholic Church has millions of dollars every year at its disposal to help the poor. And he said, no more churches, no more gold buildings. Use it to end poverty. Use it to fight for the rights of these poor farm workers. Use it to create programs for them. Now, from an international body, the church will never fully endorse Chavez and Huerta's work, but local parishes will. And at one point, they have a strike where 71 ministers of the Catholic Church and nuns are arrested for protesting unfair labor practices. Chavez said, of all of these attempts, I am convinced that the truest act of courage, the strongest act of manliness, is to sacrifice ourselves for others in a totally non-violent struggle for justice. He goes on to say, to be a man is to suffer for others. God, help us be men. You see, Chavez was inspired and even corresponded with Dr. Martin Luther King. This is where he got the idea for the great boycott that lasted 5 years and worked in tandem with the Filipino migrant worker associations to boycott, first domestically and then globally, grapes that were largely produced in California. He was incredibly successful, and he got that idea of the boycott from Dr. King. He also got the idea of a march patterned after Selma, marching with faith and what God has in store for us. And he'll march hundreds from Delano up to Sacramento, the state capital of California, 250 miles. And he said, during this time, this is also when he embarked on his first fast, again, inspired by Dr. King and Gandhi, after Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, nonviolent resistance, where you have the attention of the society and you abide by its laws and accept the consequences. That is the way to show injustice. It's the same model of satyagraha that will inspire Dr. King. And Dr. King and Chavez, when they corresponded at one point, Chavez says of this, during my first fast in 1968, Dr. King reminded me that our struggle was his struggle too. He sent me a telegram which said, our separate struggles are really one, a struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity. I was profoundly moved that someone facing such a tremendous struggle himself would take the time to worry about a struggle taking place on the other side of the continent. Just as Dr. King was a disciple of Gandhi and Christ, we must now be Dr. King's disciples. Chavez and Huerta will go on and spend the rest of their lives as activists. Chavez will die early, unfortunately, in 1993 at the age of 66. He'll go on to get a Presidential Medal of Honor from President Clinton. And Dolores Huerta is still very much alive and still very much an activist. And in all of their work and in all of their partnerships, they seek out Christian churches, Christian-run unions and organizations, Christian service groups, and anyone else who will partner with them. So like the civil rights movement and the leadership of Dr. King, the convictions, both personally and as an organization, of Chavez and Huerta and the farm worker movement were Christian driven and should be categorized as such historically. Thank you. I have no idea how long that was.